Hi there. My name's Jeff. This is Ali, and today we're speaking to Dr. Keith Tsui, or Keith. Um, before we get started, just a little bit of background. Keith studied medicine in Hong Kong and then relocated to Cambridge. I think the first question that's relevant to this podcast is, why do you choose to go into medicine?
Yeah, so I think medicine is very interesting, but the initial fascination for me is actually about life, because life is kind of like the only thing that we have, and I'm fascinated about the study of life, which is biology. And medicine is a great way for me to learn more about life and the human body, how it works, how life works, and at the same time, it actually paves a path to really kind of like fix I guess, problems in life, which is the disease states and the illnesses that a human could encounter. So I went into it like really, I guess, wanting to learn more about the human body, medicine, and life. It's kind of more of an academic interest. But at the same time, there also comes this benefit of being able to really help people to live their best lives when they're pain free, when they're like illness free. And I think another aspect that I liked about medicine is that I'm a keen problem solver. So like being able to use innovative medicine or surgical techniques to help solve problems for patients is something that's I'm passionate about as well.
That's super interesting. So, I mean, you mentioned you're talking a lot about patient care, understanding the pathophysiology, but you don't really talk about med tech. Is there much of a med tech scene in Hong Kong?
Yeah, so I would say it definitely got better over the years, over kind of like the past few years. But when I was practicing and going through med school in Hong Kong, it really there isn't a lot of opportunities or med tech in Hong Kong. And actually, it is through medicine that I realized that I'm so passionate about solving problems that I want to make the solutions to solve these problems as well. Therefore, I got interested into kind of entrepreneurship and ended up being a medtech entrepreneur myself.
So you sort of answered my next question, which was about what sort of inspired you to get into entrepreneurship. So you're now the CEO and co-founder of Medwise.ai. Where did the idea for Medwise.ai come from?
Yeah, so I think I'm solving a problem that I personally encountered, and that is when I was a junior doctor back in Hong Kong doing night shifts. I would be super tired. I haven't had dinner. I still have a lot of patients to see in the middle of the night with a lot of complaints, and I would be like, Jeff, it's like reliving like maybe the last shift.
Jeff, I think Jeff's getting a little triggered here.
Go on, go on. Yeah. So essentially, I would be like alone in the hospital ward, and I would have patients that I want to kind of like care for them, and I would want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing for them because I'm still junior. I don't want to make mistakes, but what I have at my disposal is a kind of like small booklet that I carry in my pocket, which is just written by my senior. So it's not even evidence-based. There's no kind of like annotation saying like this is from this research, or this RCT. But we use it all the time. And the other thing that I could use is Google, literally just Googling things. And that kind of triggered me to think more about how can we make the experience much more seamless and much better for clinicians, and literally giving them the answer they need at the point of care very quickly. So that's kind of a problem that I wanted to solve myself. And I guess just to back to your previous question around what inspired me to go into entrepreneurship, I think the one experience that I had is when I was in medical school. I saw this patient in his 40s who came in with kind of like a distended tummy, like a large distended tummy, and he wasn't in a lot of pain. But he isn't really sure what's happening. So doesn't know what his diagnosis is yet. I remember chatting with him, and he mentioning and calling his wife and kids and saying, "Oh, I have no pain. I'll come out soon." But I was scrolling through his CT scan, but he had end-stage pancreatic cancer. So it was quite a shock diagnosis to me, because I know the kind of life expectancy is really poor for the patient, and obviously the team would try to do the best to provide palliative care to make the patient as comfortable as possible. But that kind of triggered my thought as to whether kind of I realized that there are limitations to what a clinician can do, and there are with the existing drugs or diagnostic tests. This patient has been missed. Like, can we have like more innovative diagnostic tests to detect the cancer at an earlier stage? Some screening tests. Can we have more targeted therapy that can penetrate the pancreatic tissue better? And so that single patient got me thinking about what else can I do as a clinician? And I realized that it's about making new solutions and creating these new solutions that can empower clinicians or empower patients to better care for their patient or care for themselves. And that's kind of the I guess one single moment that really inspired me to go into health tech entrepreneurship.
Wait, so you have these two really amazing stories, and then I see this endpoint of Medwise. Did you just step from clinical work into Medwise, or what were the steps in between that led you directly to where you are right now?
Yeah, so it was kind of a journey for me to get to where I am right now. So after medical school, I decided to continue to practice, and I think I would encourage even medical students who are interested in healthcare entrepreneurship to do practice, because when you practice, you will see additional problems that you may not have realized when you're just a medical student. And then it will give you more insights and problems to solve, which could become viable business ideas. And so I completed the foundation year, the equivalent training or junior doctor training, got my license, and then I went to University of Cambridge in the UK to study a master's in bioscience enterprise. So it's kind of like a MBA in life science and healthcare. How do you translate ideas from the bench to the bedside, be it a new drug or a new medical device or digital health technology? And that was an amazing experience to really allow me to move from a frontline clinician to then understand more about the business of healthcare, life science, and medical technologies. And afterwards, I was a management consultant working on NHS projects, helping hospitals to improve their productivity. And then I was a product manager at a digital health unicorn called Huma. They do remote patient monitoring and a hospital at home, virtual clinical trials. That was a great learning experience for me as I joined when they just raised their Series 8 round, and then I left. So the company grew from like 30 to like 150 throughout the year that I was there. So great experience again. And with all these different experience, kind of like having experienced these different roles, I then finally felt kind of confident enough to start my own company, which is still crazy because I'm still learning so much like every day.
That's fascinating. You've worn so many hats, but you still don't feel experienced enough. But I think, my question here is I've heard so many of my friends and colleagues talk about interest in medical innovation. And you've just mentioned that it's important to continue clinical work so that, you can continue to needs identify. But you took that step into management consulting. Tell me about that, that thought process, why that change, and if you could go back, would you do the same thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think management consultants sometimes have a bad name within healthcare industry, that they're not providing the most value. I think it completely depends on how management consultants are being used. I think in terms of problem solving, they have a great framework. And most of the time you do need extra capacity to deliver on some change management program or implementation of certain programs. So I do think there is value, but at the same time, the biggest reason for me to move into management consulting is to transition from being a clinician to being able to deliver projects, communicate with clients, but at the same time also have a broader understanding of the healthcare system. Because as a clinician in the front line, you may not be able to see, okay, what's happening in the back office, how is or why is a hospital run like this? How do you manage the estates? How do you manage the workforce? How do you manage the finances of the hospital? And be having kind of both the frontline understanding of the challenges as a clinician, but also having an understanding on the back end, on the administrative side, what are some challenges there. Then you suddenly see, okay, when I develop a solution, not only it needs to satisfy the needs of patients and clinicians, but actually it also needs to satisfy the finance director. Like if it doesn't generate an ROI, no matter how much quality of care improvement you're providing to the patient, they may not have the funding to kind of like procure the solution. So having a good, I think, entering into management consultancy, but for me, it was a healthcare specific management consultancy. Those are not doing like aerospace or telecom.
You did?
But for me, no, they're not giving. So for me, that would not be much of a value add. But understanding better about how healthcare system works is for me, it's actually a really good experience and gave me a lot of better understanding of how I could potentially really develop solutions to sell into healthcare system.
Yeah, so it sounds like management consulting really helped you understand, gave you the business acumen to launch your own organization. But I wanna talk a bit about challenges and roadblocks when you made that switch from being a clinician to now being an entrepreneur. What were some of the biggest roadblocks that you faced? Some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I think for me, actually, the biggest roadblock is kind of the initial internal struggle, because I'm already in medical school. I've completed like kind of 3 years of training, and then suddenly realizing that like practicing it may not be my kind of the kind of highest passion that I have. Like, I think my biggest passion is around developing new solutions for patients and clinicians. And you can do that alongside practice, but at the same time, when I was back in Hong Kong, there didn't really seem to be many options for me to do that. So for me to really able to chase my passion, I probably need to leave the profession in Hong Kong to do it elsewhere. So and that's how I ended up in the UK, where there's a lot more opportunity compared to Hong Kong. So I think it's being able to convince yourself that this is really something that you want to do, and because it is an opportunity cost where if you are practicing, obviously you are helping a lot of patients every day. So for me, I've always set the benchmark of like, if I am doing something other than practicing, I want to have more impact than I was just practicing as a clinician day in and day out. If I can see 60 patients a day, then what I'm working on, I need to at least impact more than 60 patients a day. Like if I can build a new drug or a new solution, I think that is kind of like the thing that I often bear in mind. I think I'm very lucky and very fortunate to have parents that support my kind of career change. I don't think even in Western society, not a lot of parents are that supportive when your kids have been through medical school, through all that training. So I'm very fortunate in that sense. I'm like a huge shout out to mom and dad. They're listening to this podcast. Thanks a lot, making my life easier. And then I think ultimately it's also being in the right ecosystem. So for example, for me, if I decided to quit medicine and to continue to pursue this path in Hong Kong, I probably would have met a lot more roadblock and challenges. But by being in the right place, like coming into the UK, kind of like the golden triangle between London, Cambridge, and Oxford, there's tons of digital health startups. There's tons of life science startups. So I think there's an ecosystem where it's kind of like socially more accepted for clinicians to move away from day-to-day practice to do entrepreneurship and innovation.
That's a really like fascinating, clear way in which you've laid out the different roadblocks. But I think the most salient one to me, because I'm at the beginning of my career, is that decision as to whether or not to pivot full time to medical innovation / entrepreneurship. I guess you've mentioned the whole, you try to balance, clinical time with medical entrepreneurship and innovation. But my two questions to that are, number one, why not just work as a medical consultant with a company, either a startup or a large multinational that is creating products that can rapidly scale their impact to beyond 60 patients a day, the rate that you quoted? And at what point do you think it's a good idea to switch? Do you think it's when you have a good idea or when you have a good team? Like, what is a benchmark that you think is a good reference from when someone should pivot from a full-time to a part-time career, or full-time medicine to, I guess, full-time entrepreneurship career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's no kind of right or wrong answer here. So it depends on every person's preference. I do think that there is a huge merit in kind of the roots of becoming a medical consultant, becoming a key opinion leader in your space. And then because you're the key opinion leader, you probably have the experience to really identify something very unique that is either patentable or and I think that is a really good way to build very valuable companies that can impact a lot of patients. So I think if I am very passionate about one specialty, which unfortunately I'm not, and that's why going into full-time and trying doing more entrepreneurship is more of my passion. But if you have a specific specialty that you are really passionate about, I think it's probably a good career to continue practicing and then build your credibility and then start a company. And that way you probably will be able to raise funding much easier. But because comparatively, it's like if you're a junior doctor and you are very passionate about healthcare technology, you jump out, you start a company, for example, a WhatsApp or Slack for doctors, and a messaging tool is much needed. Like I used to still use kind of like pagers, 100% needed. But like, how do you differentiate yourself from all the other entrepreneurs who can start a very similar company? So I do think it depends on every person's kind of like passion and interest. But I think a good advice that I would say is if you have some idea, just run it as a side project, talk to your users or your customers and kind of just validate it. You don't have to jump in full time. And then you will know at a point when either the idea or the MVP suddenly is taking off and it's like you're growing the user numbers so quickly that you don't have enough, your server goes down all the time. Like, I mean, that's a good indication that you probably should maybe quit and do it full time, right? Otherwise, there may be at some point that you will feel so passionate about it. Maybe you found the perfect co-founder. Maybe there's a new technology that you feel like, oh, it finally solved your problem. Or maybe there's a regulatory change that suddenly like everyone will need to buy your product. Then suddenly you can, if you have already built the kind of foundations, your side project have some MVP going, then again, it may be a good opportunity for you to pivot to full time. So I think there's a lot of ways that people will end up pursuing the entrepreneurship full time, but there's no hard and fast rule to how you can do it.
Yeah, on that note around opportunity, we're seeing digital transformation kind of speed up in healthcare, in part because of the pandemic, but it was happening prior to that as well. So due to that, we are seeing a lot of opportunity in the health tech, med tech space. For those budding entrepreneurs who are listening to this right now, what opportunities do you see out there for them?
Yeah, so I think definitely kind of the silver lining of the pandemic is that there's massive adoption of solutions like telemedicine, and there's a very kind of like increased awareness of how fragile healthcare systems can be, and it needs a lot more innovation and support to really for us to kind of be able to survive the next pandemic, for example. So I think there's huge opportunities, especially to address some of the problems that we've seen, which is a mismatch between supply and demand. So there's only going to be increased demand on the healthcare system with the aging population, but there's kind of a decreasing supply of healthcare workforce. So in the UK, for example, the number of GPs has been decreasing. So there's huge opportunity to build better solutions like AI to automate admin process so that we can give back the gift of time to clinicians and the workforce, and to start addressing some of these supply and demand imbalance. I think one caveat I would say is, although AI is quite hyped, and I think there is definitely a role of AI to play in healthcare, and there's a lot of other technology that have been hyped, like VR or the metaverse or decentralized software or blockchains and stuff like that. I think it is very important for the budding entrepreneurs to always start with a problem. Don't start with a solution and then try to find a problem. And especially if you're a clinician, you're practicing, anything that you experience day to day, anything, small things that bugs you. Why do we have to do this like day in and day out? And something that, for example, like it seems like everyone is just accepting it as a kind of a day to day thing, but you think that this is a problem, start exploring those, like, because potentially it may be just because the system is so used to these things like fax machines or pagers, like, but there could be other opportunities there that because you are practicing, you may notice it and you can kind of like turn it into a viable business.
I'm gonna push back on you for that, Keith. Why not start with a solution? Why can't we all focus on a solution and then go to a problem? Because that's actually something that like several of our previous guests have done successfully. Mm-hmm. So what's your thinking? What's your rationale?
Yeah. So for me, I think it takes a longer time to get to market if you start from a solution. I'm not saying that it's the wrong approach. I'm just saying that it's not my approach or not my recommended approach. I think there are a lot of great technology and potentially, so for example, mRNA technology, it's a technology kind of that has been there, and then suddenly there's a huge market push of like developing vaccines for COVID. So I think it's very important to continue to have academic research and patents and tech transfer to commercialize those research. But then it's usually a longer process for a solution to find a problem, because you have to continuously test and then maybe iterate the solution to finally fit the problem. While when we see kind of the biggest kind of companies out there, I think they usually start with a problem first and then quickly iterate the solution. And then once they have the solution that fits the problem, they just take off. So I think if there are problems to be solved, and I think it's a more kind of efficient way of using human resources to solve problems.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm going to agree with Keith here. I think when it comes to, it's business school 101. You focus on the problem, as you take as much time as possible to focus on the problem, and the solution follows through. So Keith, I'm with you on this one. But
Just while I'm down, man. Come on.
But I want to, you brought up something that I found interesting, which is artificial intelligence. There was a McKinsey report that came out. It defines artificial intelligence as, and I quote, the capability of a computer program to perform tasks or reasoning processes that we usually associate with intelligence in a human being, close quote. So based on this definition of AI, do you feel AI is making healthcare better?
Yeah, so I think AI definitely have the opportunity to make healthcare better. I think by that definition, AI has been around for a long time. So, for example, using software that is run on an ECG to help you identify certain patterns, they don't necessarily have the current kind of AI or machine learning models. But by that definition, it's a computer program that performs some tasks or reasoning processes to support the clinician. So I think AI have been, by that definition, AI have been around, and AI have been around to make healthcare better for a really long time already. And right now we're just seeing more powerful AI with the advancements in chips and kind of like data, a massive collection of data that we can have even more sophisticated AI to provide additional value in the healthcare system. But I do think AI is overhyped in some sense that AI can't do everything. Right now, AI is still quite narrow in the sense that it can perform specific tasks really well, and it will never get tired, and it can run 24/7. But it is still kind of incomparable to certain human intuition and experience when dealing with especially very complex scenarios. And this is not something that AI can currently do. We will probably need the development of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, to be able to do that. And we're quite far away from that. Although I'm quite excited to see some development, especially in the NLP space, where language models behave a little bit like AGI. So very excited about that space. But I think overall AI is definitely making healthcare better, but the way that it's making healthcare better is by working with clinicians and supporting clinicians and augmenting clinicians so that clinicians can spend more time dealing with what AI is not good at, while AI can be kind of run 24/7 and to really automate tasks that a human would find mundane to do.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of touched upon my next question, which was about the sort of the cons of AI. You're right; it can never reach that level of human intuition. But are there any other cons you see in AI's use?
Yes, I think this is not a con of AI, but AI, I think, is a new technology that clinicians should be trained to use. So I think if a clinician is not fully aware of how it works or how it can be embedded in the workflow, AI would either be not used, or it may be used, it may be misused. So we know there's a lot of kind of procedures or investigations that are overly prescribed, or drugs that are overly prescribed. And this is already, without AI, this is a problem. When there are AI could potentially be misused and maybe overprescribed as well. And there's over reliance on AI technologies to do diagnosis or screening, for example. And we need to make sure that we address the gap of training clinicians to be able to use AI, and to also still be kind of trained to perform well even without the AI, and not be too over reliant. And I also think that we should always bear in mind that AI is there to empower and support clinicians, and not there to replace clinicians. And I think there is a kind of still, for some clinicians, a fear, which I think is misplaced, that AI will replace them. And I think these are kind of not really cons in AI, but I think just challenges for widespread AI adoption, and things that we still need to solve.
Right. Okay. And now I kind of want to take it back to creating business ideas, and you've already created one with Medwise. What do you do to find inspiration for coming up with a viable business idea? Is there like a formula to it, or what do you do? Do you go for like a long walk, or do you sit at your desk and write stream of conscious notes? Tell me about that process, about coming up with an idea.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of ways to come up with business ideas. I think most of the time I would start with a problem, and it would be a problem that I encountered when I was practicing. And I think that's probably the most ideas that I have is from problems that I personally encountered. But there are additional ways that you could come up with ideas. And I think talking with others, very smart people who are an expert in their space, either in AI and computer vision, in NLP, or in crypto, blockchain. So I think just having a community of innovative people that you can just chat with and discuss and hang out, I think that's a really good way to start to have ideas about businesses that you can turn into businesses. But I think no idea is automatically a viable business. So I think you will always need to develop hypotheses, talk with users, talk with customers, and then to test the idea to see if it is viable or not. And I think that there's a book that is like Lean Startup. I'm sure a lot of people will have heard of it. It's a very systematic way that you can turn ideas into a viable business.
Keith, you're really stealing my thunder here. I was going to ask you what your favorite book was going to be. And Ali, I'm a little insulted that you didn't ask me what my approach to finding business ideas is, and that's walking through forest.
Jeff, what is your approach?
It's
what is your approach?
Through
and we can always ask Keith for another book.
I'll do that, but hear me out. It's walking through a forest and just consuming mushrooms that I come across until I come across a great idea.
That's creative. That's very creative.
It certainly is very creative. Let me tell you that. But other than that specific book, I guess, how do you more rapidly identify, I guess, which ideas are viable versus not? Because it seems like ideas really are a dime a dozen. Like, we see clinical problems every day, but I think the choke point here is like identifying which ones to move forward with. Because once you've put an investment, whether or not it's of time, of capital, social capital, into an idea, it's really hard to let go. You've spent a whole bunch of resources on it. So how do you make sure that you most rapidly and accurately identify a good idea other than reading that book?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So I think it's interesting because good ideas, or like things that are obvious, will be everywhere. So you wouldn't be the one that have this unique idea. So for example, telemedicine is quite obvious to a lot of people. Obviously, a great idea. It needed the pandemic for it to really take off. But in that sense, it's very quickly, you talk to a lot of people, they agree with you. Okay, it's needed. Then it's already a viable business idea. But like, I think there is something that is less talked about, and is another book, 0 to 1. where being a contrarian and being right is probably not being considered enough when you kind of try to sort out all the different business ideas, which one would be viable, or in sometimes business ideas, you will never know whether it's viable or not. So until like a later stage. But it's about the passion that you have and your belief whether this is, if it is successful, is it a big enough company? Is it a valuable enough company for you to spend the time on, even if it fails? Do you think like it is worthwhile to do it? I think there's a quote from Elon Musk that says, even if all the odds are stacked against you, but if you really believe it's the right thing to do, and it's important enough to do, you should still do it, even if you think you have a 99% chance to fail. You should still do it just because it's important enough. So I think those are actually some ideas that you should not discard. Like, even if you don't feel like it's viable right now, there could be a different business model that you haven't thought of that would make the idea viable later on. And I would say, don't just, I think bigger, think about impact. Like, if it is successful, how much impact would you have? And are you passionate about solving that problem and bringing that impact? And then you will work very hard to make it from a not viable idea to a viable business.
That's fascinating. And with that, I guess, do you have any pluggables to plug, Keith? Is there anything that you want to bring up that you're working on that you want everyone to know about?
Very good question. So
Thank you.
So I think I didn't have the chance to talk about what Medwise is, so I will plug that in here. So Medwise is essentially a Google for doctors. So we're helping clinicians find answers really rapidly at the point of care. And we're launched in the UK. We're looking to launch in Africa as well, because we're partnered with a very distinguished NGO called Global Medic Force, and they do clinical skill transfer, usually in person. So they have volunteers, doctors going into Africa, and then teaching. And with COVID-19, it's very difficult for them to do that. And we're building kind of a digital version of a mentor using our AI. So that's a very exciting project that we're really excited about. And we recently got funded by Startup Health, which is one of the prominent accelerators program. And we're looking to expand to the US and Canada. If there's any listener who's interested, please reach out at Medwise.ai. We'd love to chat and see how we can bring our solution to your practice or organization as well.
All right. And with that, we'll close off.